The brand was formed less than 18 months ago and they have a back catalogue of only one previous release, but already Kefine are making big waves in the audio world. The Delci is Kefine's second release. It has a dual chamber, single 10mm DLC and PU dynamic driver, and you can pick them up for around $59 US. Coming up, we'll be assessing the design and build quality, the ergonomics and fit and how they wear in the real world. We'll be discussing their sound and looking at their frequency response measurements, and we'll look at how they fare in comparison to some of those other popular single DD IEMs in the Delci's price category, including the Simgot EA500LM and their slightly cheaper EW200, the similarly spec'd Star One from EPZ, and the more expensive although similarly tuned Dunu Falcon Ultra. But let's start with what you get in the box and how it's presented. I think the most accurate way to describe Kefine in terms of their branding, but also the product itself, is elegant simplicity. Looking at some of those other specifications, you've got an impedance of 28 ohms and a sensitivity of 108 dB, meaning that this should be pretty straightforward to drive. Kefine haven't gone too overboard with the accessories, but what you get is pretty high quality. I know a lot of people aren't really bothered by them, but if it's good enough quality, then I'll always use the supplied case. For a budget set, the faux leather Kefine branded one that comes with the Delci is actually pretty nice. It measures 11 by 8 by 4 centimeters. It has a little pocket inside where you can store your spare tips. And on the subject of tips, you get small, medium and large in narrow bore, and then small, medium and extra large in wide bore. And the tips are actually pretty decent quality. The narrow bore ones take the sting out of the upper mids a little bit, whereas the wide bore make the bass chunkier and give a little more sizzle to the treble. I got my best seal and best performance with these ones from Dunu. I'll leave a link in the description if I can find them. The Delci are 0.78mm 2-pin. And Kefine have delivered a very high quality corresponding cable here. It's oxygen free copper, 164 strand and 1.2 meters long. Both the 3.5mm termination and the neck pull tightener thingy are subtly branded, and you've got L and R marked on either side. Pins give you a very nice flush connection against the IEM, so there's not much chance of those breaking off. And the ear hooks, for me at least, have that ideal balance between comfort and stability. I try not to set my expectations too high when it comes to accessories, but for a budget set, I'm quite impressed. Everything is perfectly usable, and if you're buying your first IEM, for example, you're almost certainly not going to have to chuck this stuff and get replacement cases or tips in. As we saw in the intro, the Delci have a real captivating look to them. If you've witnessed any of my previous reviews, you know I'm a sucker for a metallic body IEM, and this one hits all the high notes when it comes to both looks and ergonomics. They're constructed from a precision CNC machined aviation grade aluminium alloy. The anodization gives it a smoky gunmetal look, and it's extremely durable and scratch resistant. I much prefer this to the shiny glossy effect on some IEMs like the EA500LM, which could be a real fingerprint magnet. The finishing on the Delci is much higher quality than its price tag would suggest. There's no rough round offs or sharp edges, and none of the finishing or quality control issues that you see with some other brands. On the inside, you've got 2 tuning holes there to improve acoustic performance. It's a pretty shallow insertion nozzle, and it gives the Delci a depth of around 21.5mm. They're also probably the lightest metal body IEM I've ever tested, weighing in just over 5 grams. For some perspective, that's double the weight of the Simgot EA500LM and only marginally heavier than the resin shell of EPZ's Star One. This, combined with the subtle curvature on the inside, mean that whilst the Delci can look flush mount almost in your ears, it's a very relaxed and comfortable fit that with the right ear tips can give you excellent isolation. And what about the sound? Well, if you watch any of my previous reviews, you'll know that I'm really picky and selective over the bass on IEMs. Whilst the Delci isn't a bass headset, I feel like Kefine have really delivered here, particularly in the sub bass. What I particularly like about the bass on this set is that it's physical and it's abrasive, but it doesn't lose its tune either. There's an airy tactility to the bass that reminds me a little bit of the EA1000, although obviously you've just got much more quantity here. Genres that combine sub bass with percussion, jazz and reggae in particular sound really nice. It's a full-bodied bass, deeper than most harmonish sounding sets. It isn't super tightly controlled, but it isn't loose either, so you don't get that kind of pillowy sound that you'll hear with some IEMs. If you like rock and metal, you'll appreciate the layering that's going on in the lower frequencies. But the nature of sets which are tuned like this means you do lose a little bit of slam and a bit of punch in the mid bass. So if you like EDM, likes of Oliver Heldens, where the whole track is in that mid bass region, then that lack of impact in the attack might not curry favour with you. There's assertive macro dynamics, but a really nice tonal balance. And there's a smoothness to the upper mid-range that definitely sets them apart from the plethora of identikit Harman tuned sets out there. There's a little bleed from those lower frequencies into the mid-range, but I have to say it gives the Delci a lot of character. The lower mid-range is pretty transparent. There's a richness to male vocals which sounds smooth, warm and rich. Vocals sit back a little bit compared to instruments, again demonstrating the Delci's layering. Female vocals also sound great as well. I think if you were being really picky, you could say sometimes they lack a little crispness, but they're certainly never sibilant and there's no nasty peaks. Maybe it's because we've all got so used to that emphasized 5K from the likes of Simgot that we've forgotten and perhaps need time to re-appreciate what a slightly less crystalline and more natural sounding but still powerful vocal sounds like. Sometimes the graphs don't necessarily always give you the whole picture, and that's definitely the case when it comes down to the trebles. On paper this looks quite safe and relaxed, but things could get a little spicy, particularly in that lower treble region, hence why I used slightly narrower bore tips to tame it a little, and what a difference it made. There's still plenty of bite to percussion, and clashes and cymbals all have the right amount of dynamism. The upper treble tails off a little earlier than some of its competitors, losing a little bit of air from the presentation, but with an already fairly expansive soundstage, that added air might have confused matters a little. The smoothness and longevity are its strengths here. It's not a set for treble heads. For me, at least, Kefine have got the balance between non-fatigue and sufficient detail spot on. The danger with this type of tuning is that sometimes it can sound a little boring, but the Delci definitely isn't that. And despite its tuning, the staging feels quite expansive at times, and this is accentuated by the vocals sitting back a little. Imaging is for the most part good enough. I would say it's more accurate than precise, and where there's a bit of a trade-off between musicality and technicality, I do feel like the Delci straddles this slightly fine line well. Overall, when it comes to the sound, the Delci scores well in all categories. It's an immersive musical experience that still doesn't fall short on technicalities. Its U-shaped presentation is natural and cohesive. Its robust and well-delivered bass sets it apart from the crowd. As I said in the intro, these are typically priced around the $59 mark, which means you've got loads of competition if you pay around $59, or if you pay a little bit less or a little bit more. So how does the Delci compare to some of those models that we spoke about in the intro? Well, let's take a closer look. And where better to start than the Simgot EA500LM, a set that I said in my review at the turn of 2024 was an early contender for IEM of the year. From a hardware perspective, there's not a great deal of difference. Both are using a new generation dual chamber single dynamic driver, but the LM are $30 more expensive. For that, you're getting 3 different tuning nozzles, which does give the LM a little more versatility. The nozzle with the most similar sound profile to the Delci is the gold red, but I would still say they sound quite different. The Delci is a little bit more organic and more realistic sounding, particularly with vocals. It's smoother and the soundstage is wider. The LM, on the other hand, is more energetic and vibrant. It plays well with techno and EDM, for example, but it's more technically capable as well, with slightly more accurate imaging. If you favour that warmer organic sound and you're on a strict budget, then the Delci are probably going to be a more favourable option. Next up, it's the Star One, a collaboration between EPZ and Tipsy. For whatever reason, this didn't seem to capture the imagination of the buying public. It's more popular with certain reviewers who have tested it out. It's a bit more expensive, it's around $77, and it's definitely harder to drive. And unlike the Delci and the LM, it doesn't have a metallic body. From a sound perspective though, the moment you give it sufficient power, you realise what a capable IEM the Star One is. Both can demonstrate quite expansive staging, Both are more stereo than holographic, but the Star One has a brighter sound profile as well as not having quite as much sub-bass rumble. If you like female vocals, particularly over acoustic tracks, then you might prefer the sweeter sparkle of the Star One. But otherwise, I'd recommend going with the Delci. It represents much better value for money. And what about a comparison to some of the better performing lower budget options? For instance, the Simgot EW200, which you can pick up for around $40, and the 7Hz Zero2 that's sometimes as low as just $25. Let's start with the EW200, a bright Harman neutral set. Technical performance is pretty close. I think imaging's slightly better on the EW200, but it lacks the expansive staging of the Delci. Bass is faster on the EW200, but fuller on the Delci. The EW200 can get hot though. That brightness may just wear you down. Both are very capable overall. I would say go for the one whose tuning matches your preference the most. As for the Zero2, well, this is a pretty easy one since their tuning, on paper at least, looks very similar. However, the driver in the Delci is much more capable. You get a better transient response. Vocals sound much better on the Delci and the treble has more sizzle. And what about if you spent a lot more on something like the Dunu Falcon Ultra, which have been re-released for 2024 and is going to be my next IEM review? Well, you're probably spending almost 4 times the amount, nearly $200 on the Ultra. And without being disrespectful to the Delci, you can feel that it's a more expensive IEM as well. Aside the jump in build quality, you get a fantastic array of different accessories, including a plethora of different type of tips. This one also comes with an additional tuning nozzle, although it's the blue that is probably the closest to the Delci's tuning. The staging on the Ultra definitely feels more intimate, but when it comes to imaging and micro detail, the Ultra show their class. Whether they're worth the additional $140, $150 though is definitely down to your level of disposable income. The fact we're even having a conversation comparing the Delci to a set that costs over 4 times as much tells you how highly I rate them. Overall, I think it's an excellent second release from Kefine, who are showing that they're learning very quickly. They seem to have got everything from the list of accessories to the design to the sound, all of it pretty much spot on. Whilst it lacks a little versatility compared to some of its competitors who include multiple different nozzles for different tuning profiles, if you like that warm, U-shaped but engaging sound, especially if you've had maybe the Zero Red or the Zero2 and you're looking for an upgrade, then this is definitely it. What did you think of the Kefine Delci? Interested to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to give the video a like if you enjoyed it or found it useful, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For now, it's ReganCipher signing off.